Hello, I'm Susan Elliott, the News and Special Reports Editor of Musical America. Today, we're going to be speaking with Andrew Ousley. Andrew wears a number of hats. One, he is the president and founder of Unison Media, which is a classical music PR, marketing, social media firm based in New York. He's also the producer and presenter of a series of concerts known as The Death of Classical. The concerts take place in unusual spots, such as a crypt in Harlem and the Catacombs Cemetery in Brooklyn. Hello, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today. Glad you can make it.
My pleasure, Susan. Thank you for having me.
First of all, may I say that the series that you present, Death of Classical, is just a wonderful title, but I will ask you to defend it so that we can at least get that discovered.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very much tongue-in-cheek. I think it's born out of the sort of cyclical habit that our industry has of every couple of years just wringing our hands and lamenting our own demise, the imminent demise of the classical music industry and art form and everything, and all of the patrons and audiences dying off. And again, it's something I don't think it's been correct any of the many times it's been brought up over the last century or two. So, and to me, our art form, there's more potential for thriving in our art form, I think, now than there has been in a long time. And I see a lot of life to be found in classical music and new life. And to me, as an art form, it's eternal as well. The music is eternal, and it speaks to what is immortal and transcends time and space and our differences. So kind of wraps all that up in one slightly cheeky title. The point of doing it in crypts and catacombs is that's not really the core of it. It's they're just two extraordinary spaces. But it's not the heart of what we do is trying to create a different experience around classical music without compromising or cheapening the art form itself and the music.
Right.
And to do something that could be equally appealing to somebody who's been to 1,000 shows of classical music as it could be to somebody who's been to 0. And that's the higher ethos. And we're looking at venues that are neither crypts nor catacombs, and we've presented in venues that aren't. So to me, it's more about what is the experience that we can create. But to be fair, our two primary venues at this point are still a crypt and a catacomb in a cemetery.
Okay. Most of the discussions that we have been having on these one-to-one interviews have been about the pandemic itself. And one of the things I found really interesting when I looked on your website was your belief that our mission is to tell a better story about classical music. So what do you mean by a better story? Does it relate to what you were just talking about? Or does it mean putting classical in a broad context? What does that mean?
I think it's a little bit of both. It very much is related. I think the missions of Death of Classical and Unison go hand in hand. It's to create a better experience and tell a better story about the art form. And to me, classical music, as somebody who grew up, I've never played a classical instrument. I played in rock bands my whole life. My mother was an amateur opera singer, so I fell in love with the repertoire and the music. But I don't come to it from having been an insider my whole life. And to me, I feel that the art form is such a force of good and a force for beauty in the world and in my own personal life and experience. But I find that in the past, it has oftentimes spoken about itself in a narrow way, and it is focused on talking about itself to the converted, and using the insider language and the insider terminology, and speaking about the points of interest that will be of interest to somebody who knows classical music very, very deeply. And those points of interest are not usually what will be interesting to somebody who does not know anything about classical music. And so part of our work at Unison is to help our clients and their projects be interesting, not only to the cognoscenti, the people who are the core, the beating heart of our industry, but also to figure out how to position them and how to talk about them in a way that they can be interesting to people who have otherwise no invested interest in classical music. And with Death of Classical, it's the same idea. I want somebody who writes about classical music for the major media outlets that cover classical to love what we do. But I also want somebody who has never been to a classical music concert to come and to feel welcome and to understand what we're doing and feel something, and feel as though they were given an experience that made sense to them and was exciting to them, that they wanted to be a part of. So it's trying to straddle that line for both organizations.
And part of doing that, part of your method is to get people into unusual places and make them do things like walk through a graveyard to get to the concert. Yeah, I got it.
It focuses the experience. And again, we program music that's very emotionally direct in the nature of the language, the sort of arc of the different programs or pieces. And so walking through a cemetery, being in a crypt, these things, it's impossible not to focus your attention when you're in those spaces and to be aware of your own mortality and what is most important in life. And again, to me, the point of these shows is to remind us what matters in life and to forget the sort of petty differences and divisions, and be aware, share an experience that unites us rather than divides us.
Mm-hmm. I suppose one thing we could do is to talk about first the balance between the distribution, live distribution and digital distribution, mm-hmm. and how that is going to impact performances going forward.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic obviously made people very aware of the importance of digital assets and digital content, particularly video, but also the power of that as a storytelling tool and as a medium unto itself, with varying degrees of success, in my view. I don't know that the live stream, people will continue to be as excited about live streamed performances or streamed concerts once live music has returned fully, when we are eventually, hopefully, through this pandemic. I don't know that people will continue to consume it with the same attention that they did when there was no other option. For what we do in the crypt and the catacombs and so on, I never really did much on the live streaming front. We filmed several performances in the catacombs, which will be broadcast on the New York local PBS station later this fall. But to me, really, it is about the shared live communal experience, what we do. And so I was more interested in figuring out how to continue to do that safely and trying new things like what we did with the New York Philharmonic and more experimental configurations of how we present live than trying to get into streaming wholesale, because I personally don't find it as compelling as a live music experience. But I think understanding the importance of building a platform online and creating compelling content to tell the story of what you do on those platforms, I think people became very, very aware, the ones who weren't already aware, that you cannot not do that. And now nobody will sleep on that anymore, I think.
Getting back to the sort of the content of what it is that is classical music these days, is definitely changing. Not just everything seems to be changing. Not only the venues and the ensembles, but the actual content of of the music.
Mhm.
I think I wrote to you that sometimes what do you call an indie band and what do you call a string quartet? I mean, where do you draw where do you draw the line? So what do you
Yeah.
think about
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the case. And personally, I'm all for it because, again, I am somebody who played all genres and listens to all genres. And so to me, it's, and I'm not precious about what is one or the other. To me, music is music and great music is great music. And there are elements of classical music that can sort of loosely define it in some ways, but I am happy for those lines to be blurred and pushed. And to me, we just had Caroline Shaw and Andrew Yee, cello of the Ataka Quartet, play in the Catacombs last night, and it was all over the place. They did spirituals and these gospel hymns, which Andrew rearranged in very amazing ways with cello. They did the cello solo from the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time. They did pieces that Andrew had written, that Caroline had written, and it was indescribable, the fusion of genres in technical terms, but it was beautiful. It was a powerful concert. And I think, especially as younger composers come to maturity, people who are part of the iTunes generation, the Spotify generation, where you listen to music mashed all together. It's not like you have to pull out a CD and then pull out a different CD of a different genre. Songs flow from one playlist to the other, from one listening session to the other. And so to me, part of that, the impact of the iPod forward, is not considering music in as rigidly defined genre boxes.
I know one thing I want to ask you, just so that we're not too New York centric here. Do you see this happening in other cities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think small scale performances and sort of the startup organizations, arts organizations, I see it happening in all different markets around the country. And I think there's a lot of creativity. Again, having the flexibility to experiment and still make an impact is, I think, is what these organizations bring to the art form, because we can see what they do that works, what they do that doesn't work. And it's the same way I look at Deaf of Classical. And so I see it happening all over the country in a lot of inspiring ways. So we're proud to be a part of the movement, but I think it's definitely a nationwide movement, no question.
It's interesting too that the pandemic has kind of forced the issue in the sense of the absolute necessity to perform, and people attempting to do so on their own and succeeding, and how that has perhaps encouraged a kind of entrepreneurship that wasn't necessarily there before.
100%. I think the artists have become aware more and more of the potential for them to create their own projects and to actually make an impact with them. And to me, that's something that we've focused on since the start of Unison, is the idea of encouraging artists to do self-contained, formulated statements of purpose, of their artistic purpose and mission, and create projects, not just recording projects, but concert programs, multidisciplinary initiatives, and so on, that speak to what is uniquely different about their artistic vision. And the pandemic, because there was nothing else to do, I think a lot of artists turned to that and began to understand that you can make an impact. And for instance, one of our clients, Lawrence Brownlee, wanted to do a series of discussions with artists of color, talking about, in the wake of George Floyd and the protests, speaking about equity in our art form. And so part of what we were able to do with him was to help to structure that and to roll it out and to make it impactful, find people to share it, find people to promote it, media outlets to sort of help spread the word about it. And but I think he realized that was then a project that he could have done nothing on. He could have done it very informally, but he was able to make really, I think, a powerful impact with it and reach a lot of people with a lot of very, very valuable messages and discussions through that. And a lot of artists came to that same realization that if you do it properly, you can really create from nothing projects that make a difference in our art form.
Going back to the pandemic itself, you seem to have a fairly sizable staff. Did you have to do any layoffs? Did you have to sort of stop? How did you all deal with that, with the pandemic?
We stayed busy pretty much throughout, because again, what we specialize in and continue to specialize in is the intersection of traditional and digital media and marketing and presentation and branding. So when everything shifted online and people all of a sudden had to produce and promote video content, that was what we were already doing before the pandemic hit. And so we ended up having a lot of demand. It was a shift in terms of our focus, but people still had digital initiatives that they needed promoted, and they needed them promoted to traditional media too. And so instead of promoting live performances, we were helping to create and produce and craft digital initiatives, and then promote them, market them, and roll them out on socials with best execution, but also promote them to traditional media and try to cross over in that way. So the actual work itself shifted, but it certainly didn't stop in terms of volume. And now it's crazier than ever.